They say appearances can be deceiving, but on this sunny Tuesday morning at the Copper Kettle Café, that old saying would prove to be more than just words. What started as a routine morning would soon turn into one of the most talked-about incidents in Cedar Grove's history, when 5 members of the notorious Red Scorpions Motorcycle Club made the mistake of threatening the wrong woman. They couldn't have known that the elegant businesswoman sitting quietly in the corner was Sarah Mitchell, a former CIA Special Activities Division operative with 15 years of experience in some of the world's most dangerous covert operations. By the end of that morning, their encounter would not only change the town's future, but would become a viral sensation viewed by millions, showing the world what happens when bullies pick the wrong target. Hey there. Before we begin, share where you're watching from down below. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow, we've got something even more exciting lined up for you. The morning sunlight streamed through the large windows of the Copper Kettle Café, casting warm patterns across the worn wooden floors. Sarah Mitchell pulled her silver Tesla Model 3 into the parking lot, the quiet hum of its electric motor a stark contrast to the rumbling motorcycles that would soon shatter the morning peace. At 45 years old, she kept herself in excellent shape, a necessity born from years of high-stakes operations across 3 continents. Her steel gray eyes automatically scanned the environment as she gathered her tablet and leather portfolio from the passenger seat, a habit that had saved her life more times than she cared to remember. Jenny Chen looked up from the espresso machine as Sarah entered, the small brass bell announcing her arrival. "The usual, Ms. Mitchell?" Jenny called out, already reaching for Sarah's favorite mug. The young barista had no idea that her regular customer had once dismantled an entire human trafficking ring in Southeast Asia, or prevented 3 terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. To her, Sarah was just another professional who appreciated a well-made cup of coffee and the cafe's homemade lemon pound cake. The cafe was relatively empty, with just a young couple sharing a late breakfast by the window and an elderly man reading his newspaper at the counter. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, creating a peaceful atmosphere that seemed to float between the exposed brick walls and vintage coffee posters. Sarah chose her regular table near the back corner, a position that gave her clear sightlines to both the front entrance and the kitchen exit while keeping her back protected. As she reviewed security consulting proposals on her tablet, Sarah reflected on how different her life had become since leaving the CIA. The quiet consulting work allowed her to use her skills while maintaining a low profile, helping small businesses protect themselves from both digital and physical threats. It was satisfying work, if less exciting than her previous career. But Sarah had learned long ago that excitement wasn't always a good thing. Jenny brought over her order, a double espresso and a slice of lemon pound cake. "Extra shot just how you like it," Jenny said with a wink. Sarah thanked her with a warm smile, noticing the textbooks peeking out of Jenny's apron pocket. The young barista was working her way through nursing school, showing the kind of determination Sarah respected. The peaceful morning routine was about to be shattered by the distinctive rumble of multiple Harley-Davidsons pulling into the parking lot. Sarah's hand paused midway to her coffee cup, her trained ears counting the engines. 5 bikes, all custom pipes by the sound of them. Through the large front windows, she watched as members of the Red Scorpions Motorcycle Club dismounted their bikes, their leather cuts decorated with the club's signature emblem, a blood-red scorpion clutching a twisted dagger. The young couple by the window quickly paid their bill and left, leaving a generous tip as a silent apology to Jenny. The elderly man at the counter suddenly found his newspaper intensely interesting, trying to make himself as invisible as possible. Jenny's hands trembled slightly as she wiped down the counter, her eyes darting nervously to the phone behind the register. Sarah remained perfectly still, her body relaxed but her mind shifting into the familiar state of heightened awareness that had served her well during countless operations. She noted every detail about the 5 men entering the cafe, their positions, their movements, the subtle bulges under their leather vests that suggested concealed weapons. The leader, a tall man with graying temples and a neatly trimmed beard, carried himself with military precision. Probably ex-military, Sarah assessed, noting his tactical spacing and the way he used hand signals to position his men. The Red Scorpions had been making headlines lately, their protection racket targeting small businesses across 3 counties. Sarah had read about them in the local papers, seeing the familiar pattern of escalating violence and intimidation. The cafe's owner, Eleanor Thompson, had confided in Sarah just last week about their increasing demands for protection money, but Sarah had hoped it wouldn't come to this. As the bikers spread out through the cafe, their heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor, Sarah took another sip of her espresso. She knew what was coming. She'd seen this pattern play out countless times in different places around the world. The only question was whether they would be smart enough to walk away when given the chance. Somehow she doubted it. In her experience, bullies rarely recognized their mistakes until it was too late. The leader approached the counter, his leather cut creaking as he leaned forward. "Jenny, sweetheart." His voice carried a false sweetness that made Sarah's jaw tighten. "Where's Eleanor? We need to have a chat about her latest payment. It seems she's fallen behind." Jenny's voice trembled slightly as she responded. "Ms. Thompson isn't here right now. She'll be back this afternoon." "That's unfortunate," the leader said, his tone hardening, "because we had a very specific arrangement about payment times. And when people miss payments—" He gestured around the cafe, and his companions began moving between the tables, accidentally on purpose knocking over chairs and cups. Sarah watched as one of the bikers approached her table, his shadow falling across her tablet. She didn't look up, not yet. Years of experience had taught her the value of patience, of letting situations develop before acting. Besides, she was curious to see just how far they would push things. "Hey, lady," the biker growled, his fingers drumming on her table. "This place is closed for business. Time to leave." Sarah took another sip of her espresso, still not looking up. "I haven't finished my coffee," she said quietly, her voice carrying a calm authority that made the biker pause momentarily. "And I believe this establishment is very much open for business." The leader turned from the counter, his attention drawn by her refusal to comply. He studied her for a moment, taking in her expensive blazer and professional appearance. Well, he said, moving toward her table with measured steps. "Looks like we've got ourselves someone who doesn't understand how things work around here." "I understand perfectly," Sarah replied, finally looking up to meet his gaze. Her steel gray eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, something in her expression made him falter. "You're running a protection racket, targeting small businesses like this cafe, using intimidation to extort money from hardworking people. Did I miss anything?" The leader's face darkened. "Lady, you don't want to get involved in this. Trust me." He placed both hands on her table, leaning forward in an attempt to loom over her. "The name's Marcus, and this is Red Scorpion's territory. We provide a valuable service here, keeping the peace, making sure nothing bad happens to nice places like this." Sarah set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Interesting choice of words, Marcus. Especially the part about keeping the peace while you're actively disturbing it." She glanced at his hands on her table. "And you're getting fingerprints all over my workspace." One of the other bikers, a younger man with a fresh scorpion tattoo on his neck, moved closer. "Boss, want me to show this stuck-up bike?" "Language!" Sarah interrupted, her tone sharp enough to make him snap his mouth shut. "There's a young lady present." She nodded toward Jenny, who was watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Marcus straightened up, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. "You know what? I don't think you're grasping the situation here. Let me make it real simple." He snapped his fingers, and 2 of his men moved to the cafe's windows, drawing the blinds. Another positioned himself near the door. "Much better," Sarah said, surprising them. "Fewer witnesses to what's about to happen." She began slowly gathering her papers, sliding them into her portfolio with practiced efficiency. Marcus laughed, though there was a hint of uncertainty in it. "Lady, the only thing that's about to happen is you learning a valuable lesson about respecting the Red Scorpions." "You seem very confident for someone who hasn't bothered to ask who I am," Sarah observed, closing her portfolio. "That's a tactical error, by the way. One of many you're making right now." The younger biker with the neck tattoo moved closer, cracking his knuckles. "Boss, let me shut her up." Sarah sighed, a sound filled with genuine disappointment. "And that would be tactical error number 2. She looked directly at Marcus. "Your man there is telegraphing his intentions, showing obvious signs of aggression before engaging. In any serious confrontation, that's a potentially fatal mistake." Something in her professional assessment of their technique made Marcus pause. His eyes narrowed as he took a closer look at her positioning, the way she remained perfectly calm despite being surrounded, how she had maneuvered her chair slightly to give herself more room to move. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice losing some of its bravado. "Someone who was hoping to enjoy a quiet morning coffee," Sarah replied. "Instead, I find myself dealing with 5 men who are about to make a series of increasingly poor decisions." She glanced at her watch. "Though I suppose we should get on with it. I have a meeting in an hour." The younger biker had enough of her calm demeanor. He reached for her arm, intending to pull her from her chair. "Listen, you stuck up." What happened next was so fast that Jenny, still watching from behind the counter, would later have trouble describing it to the police. The young biker's hand never reached Sarah. Somehow, he found himself face down on the floor, his arm bent at an angle that looked decidedly uncomfortable, while Sarah remained seated, one hand still resting casually on her portfolio. "That was tactical error number 3, Sarah said, her voice still eerily calm. "Initiating physical contact without properly assessing your opponent's capabilities." She applied slightly more pressure, causing the biker to whimper. "Would you like me to explain the other errors you're about to make, or should we end this now?" Marcus had taken a step back, his hand moving toward his vest where Sarah had already noted the outline of a concealed weapon. "You're going to regret this," he growled, though his voice lacked its previous confidence. "Another tactical error," Sarah noted. "Making threats while telegraphing your intention to draw a weapon." She shook her head slightly. "You really did serve, didn't you? But not in any special operations capacity, I'm guessing. Regular infantry, probably late 90s, based on your age and bearing. You should know better than this, Marcus." Her accurate assessment of his military background visibly rattled him. The other bikers looked at their leader uncertainly, waiting for direction. The young man on the floor had stopped struggling, realizing that any movement only increased his discomfort. "Last chance," Sarah said quietly. "Walk out now. Leave Eleanor in this cafe alone. Find a legitimate way to use your military experience. You're better than this, Marcus, or at least you used to be." For a moment, it seemed like he might actually consider her offer, but then his pride took over, his face hardening with rage. "Take her down," he barked to his remaining men. "Now." "And that," Sarah said with genuine regret, "would be tactical error number 5. She released the young biker's arm, allowing him to scramble away. "Jenny, dear, you might want to duck behind the counter. This is going to get a bit messy." Jenny didn't need to be told twice. She dropped below the counter just as all hell broke loose in the Copper Kettle Café. What happened next was a masterclass in close-quarters combat. The 3 remaining bikers rushed Sarah simultaneously, expecting their superior numbers to overwhelm her. Instead, they found themselves facing someone who had spent years training for exactly this type of situation. Sarah pushed away from the table with precise timing, using her chair as a barrier between herself and the first attacker. The biker's momentum carried him forward, straight into the chair's solid wooden frame. His grunt of pain was cut short as Sarah used his forward motion against him, directing him into one of his companions with a subtle redirect of the chair. Marcus had stepped back, reaching for his concealed weapon, but Sarah was already moving. She flowed between the fallen bikers like water, her movements economical and purposeful. Her hand struck out, fingers rigid, hitting precise pressure points that left the third biker gasping and clutching his throat. "Standard military training relies too heavily on brute force," Sarah commented, easily sidestepping a wild punch from one of the recovering bikers. "The CIA teaches you to end fights before they really begin." She trapped the attacker's extended arm, using his own momentum to send him crashing into a table. Coffee cups shattered on the floor, their contents spreading across the worn wood. The young biker with the neck tattoo had regained his feet and pulled a switchblade, its blade snapping open with a metallic click. "You're dead," he snarled, but his voice trembled slightly. Sarah actually smiled. "Switching to weapons already? That's tactical error number 6. She gestured at his stance. "You're holding that knife like you learned from watching movies. Would you like me to show you the proper technique before you hurt yourself?" He lunged forward, blade slashing in a wide arc. Sarah stepped inside his reach, her left hand deflecting his knife arm while her right delivered a precise strike to his solar plexus. The knife clattered to the floor as he doubled over, struggling to breathe. "Notice how I didn't need to throw a single punch?" Sarah said to no one in particular. "Energy efficiency is crucial in real combat situations. Hollywood gets that wrong too." Marcus had finally drawn his weapon, a compact .380 pistol that had seen better days. "Enough," he shouted, training the gun on Sarah. "On your knees now." The elderly man at the counter slowly lowered his newspaper, eyes wide. Jenny peeked over the counter edge, her face pale with fear. The only sound was the soft jazz still playing from the speakers, Miles Davis providing an oddly appropriate soundtrack to the scene. Sarah remained perfectly still, her hands relaxed at her sides. "That's a Walther PPK-S, isn't it? Common backup weapon for military personnel. 7-round magazine if I'm not mistaken." Her eyes locked onto Marcus's. "When was the last time you had it serviced? The slide looks sticky." Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "Shut up and get on your knees." "You know, pointing a firearm at someone who was simply enjoying their morning coffee is tactical error number 7, Sarah continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "Especially when you don't fully understand the situation. Tell me, Marcus, did you notice that I managed to disarm 3 of your men without ever showing you my left side?" Marcus's eyes narrowed in confusion, then widened in understanding. Too late. Sarah's blazer had concealed her own weapon, positioned for a left-handed draw. Before he could react, she had produced a matte black Sig Sauer with practiced smoothness. "Federal firearms license," she said calmly, her grip perfect and unwavering. "Along with all the appropriate concealed carry permits. Would you like to compare qualifications?" Marcus's hand trembled slightly, his gun wavering. The remaining conscious bikers were sprawled across the floor, groaning or frozen in place, watching the standoff unfold. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah continued, her voice taking on a professional, almost lecturing tone. "You're going to carefully place your weapon on the nearest table. Then you and your friends are going to leave this cafe. You're going to forget about your protection racket, not just here but at all the businesses you've been terrorizing." "You can't take on the whole club," Marcus growled, but his bravado was cracking. Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Actually, I can. You see, while we've been having this delightful conversation, facial recognition software has been running on the security footage. Would you like to know how many outstanding warrants exist for members of the Red Scorpions across 3 states? One of the bikers on the floor muttered a curse. Marcus's face had gone pale. "Of course, that's just the beginning," Sarah continued. "I have detailed files on your operations, your supply chains, your financial networks. Currently, those files are secured in an encrypted server. If anything happens to me, or if any business in this area reports further harassment, those files automatically go to every law enforcement agency in a 100-mile radius." "You're bluffing," Marcus said, but his gun hand had dropped slightly. "The CIA teaches you many things, Marcus. Bluffing isn't one of them." Sarah's aim remained steady. "You have 3 seconds to make your decision. After that, things get considerably more complicated." The tension in the cafe had reached its peak. Jenny held her breath behind the counter. The elderly man had completely abandoned any pretense of reading his newspaper, watching the scene with a mixture of fear and fascination. 1, Sarah began counting, her voice deadly quiet. Marcus's eyes darted between his fallen companions and Sarah's unwavering weapon. 2. The young biker with the neck tattoo was shaking his head frantically at his leader, silently pleading. Just before Sarah reached 3, Marcus's shoulders slumped. With careful movements, he placed his weapon on the nearest table and stepped back, hands raised. "Wise choice," Sarah said approvingly. Now, about those outstanding warrants. On your knees, all of you, Sarah commanded, her voice carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Hands behind your heads, fingers interlaced. She turned slightly toward the counter while maintaining her aim. Jenny, would you be kind enough to call the police now and tell them we have multiple armed suspects in custody? Jenny nodded quickly, her trembling fingers already dialing 911. The bikers complied with Sarah's instructions, the fight completely drained from them. Even Marcus, who had seemed so intimidating just minutes ago, now looked deflated as he knelt on the cafe floor. While we wait, Sarah continued, keeping her weapon trained on the group, let's discuss the extent of your operations. Marcus, why don't you start with explaining how many businesses you've been extorting in Cedar Grove? Marcus remained silent, but the younger biker with the neck tattoo suddenly spoke up. 14, he blurted out, ignoring the glare from his leader. 14 businesses, but some in Millbrook too, and over in Harrison County. Tommy, shut your mouth, Marcus growled, but Sarah cut him off. Tommy, is it? She addressed the young biker. Smart of you to cooperate. That will look good in your statement. How long have you been with the Red Scorpions? 6 months, Tommy replied, his earlier bravado completely gone. I didn't want to hurt nobody, I swear. They said it was just about protection, keeping the peace. Sarah's voice softened slightly. Let me guess. They found you when you were down on your luck, offered you brotherhood, a sense of belonging. When Tommy nodded, she continued. That's how organizations like this operate. They prey on people looking for connection, then twist that need into something destructive. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Sarah noted with approval that Jenny had managed to keep her voice steady while giving the dispatcher clear, precise details about the situation. The police will be here in about 30 seconds, Sarah announced. I suggest you all remember that cooperation at this stage can significantly impact your sentencing. Tommy, you particularly might want to consider turning state's evidence. You're young enough to start over. Marcus turned to glare at Tommy. You rat us out, you're dead. That would be another tactical error, Marcus, Sarah said sharply. Witness intimidation on top of your other charges? Not wise. She paused as police cars pulled into the parking lot, their lights painting the cafe walls in rotating patterns of red and blue. Besides, if anything happens to Tommy or anyone else who cooperates, those files I mentioned will still find their way to law enforcement, along with some interesting details about your activities in Afghanistan before your honorable discharge. Marcus's face went pale. How did you... Former CIA, remember? Sarah's smile was cold. We keep very detailed records. The cafe's door burst open as police officers entered, weapons drawn. Sarah immediately identified herself. Federal firearms license holder, weapon drawn. I'm placing my weapon on the table now. Her movements were slow and deliberate as she set her Sig Sauer down. Officer Sarah Rodriguez, a veteran of the force whom Sarah knew from her morning coffee runs, quickly took control of the scene. As the bikers were being handcuffed and read their rights, Rodriguez approached Sarah. Want to explain why my quiet Tuesday morning just got so interesting? Rodriguez asked, holstering her weapon. Sarah shrugged elegantly. Just a small discussion about business ethics. Is Detective Chen working today? He'll want to hear about the Red Scorpions operations in Harrison County. Rodriguez eyed the scene. Overturned furniture, broken coffee cups, and 5 members of a notorious biker gang in custody. Small discussion, huh? She shook her head with a mix of amusement and exasperation. You know I'll need a full statement. Of course, Sarah agreed. But first, she turned toward the counter. Jenny, if you wouldn't mind, I believe I'm ready for a fresh cup of coffee. My last one got cold during the discussion. Jenny, who had emerged from behind the counter, let out a slightly hysterical laugh. On the house, Ms. Mitchell. Definitely on the house. As officers began taking statements and photographing the scene, customers who had fled earlier started cautiously returning. The elderly man who had witnessed everything hadn't moved from his spot at the counter, his newspaper now completely forgotten. That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen, he declared to anyone who would listen. She took them down like some kind of superhero. Sarah winced slightly at the description. Not a superhero, Mr. Harrison. Just someone who believes in standing up to bullies. She accepted the fresh coffee from Jenny. Though I do apologize for disrupting your morning reading. More police cars were arriving, along with local news vans that had picked up the call on their scanners. Sarah could see curious onlookers gathering outside, phones raised to record whatever they could see through the windows. This is going to be all over social media within an hour, Rodriguez commented. Sarah sighed. So much for keeping a low profile. She took a sip of her coffee, then added thoughtfully, though perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. Sometimes people need to see that it's possible to stand up to intimidation. Tommy, now handcuffed and waiting to be escorted to a police car, spoke up again. Ms. Mitchell, I want to tell them everything. About all the businesses, the operations, everything. Sarah nodded approvingly. Good choice, Tommy. Officer Rodriguez, you might want to have Detective Chen talk to him first. I have a feeling he's going to be a valuable witness. As the morning's events began to settle into something resembling order, Sarah noticed Eleanor Thompson, the cafe owner, pushing through the growing crowd outside. The look of fear on Eleanor's face as she surveyed the damage to her cafe quickly turned to confusion as she saw the handcuffed bikers, and then to astonishment as Jenny rushed to tell her what had happened. Eleanor Thompson stood in the center of her cafe, taking in the scene with wide eyes as Jenny finished recounting the morning's events. Police officers moved efficiently around them, documenting evidence and taking statements from witnesses. The 5 Red Scorpions members were already secure in separate patrol cars outside, where an increasingly large crowd had gathered. You did this? Eleanor turned to Sarah, her voice trembling. You stood up to them? For my cafe? Sarah set down her coffee cup. Not just for your cafe, Eleanor. For every business they've been terrorizing. She gestured to the overturned chairs. Though I apologize for the damage. Send me the bill for repairs. Eleanor shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. The damage? Sarah, they've been taking $3,000 a month from me for protection. I've had to take out loans to keep up with their demands. A few broken chairs are nothing compared to... She trailed off, overwhelmed with emotion. Detective James Chen chose that moment to enter the cafe, his experienced eyes quickly assessing the scene. He'd been tracking the Red Scorpions' activities for months, but could never get enough evidence or witnesses willing to testify. Now, looking at the handcuffed gang members in the patrol cars and the growing stack of witness statements, he allowed himself a small smile. Ms. Mitchell, he greeted Sarah with a knowing look. Somehow I'm not surprised to find you at the center of this. Care to fill me in? Sarah spent the next 20 minutes providing a detailed account of the incident, her precise descriptions and attention to detail reflecting her intelligence background. As she spoke, more business owners began arriving at the cafe, word having spread quickly through the town's tight-knit community. Mike Patterson, who owned the hardware store down the street, pushed through the crowd. Is it true? He asked Eleanor. Did someone finally stand up to them? His voice carried the weight of someone who had also been paying the Red Scorpions protection money. Before Eleanor could answer, Anthony Garcia, owner of the local grocery store, joined them. I got a text about what happened. They said some woman took down 5 bikers single-handedly. He noticed Sarah sitting calmly at her table and did a double-take. Wait, you're the one? Detective Chen raised his voice to address the growing group of business owners. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand you all have questions, but right now we need to focus on gathering evidence and taking statements. If any of you have been victims of extortion by the Red Scorpions, now is the time to come forward. Sarah watched as one by one, business owners began approaching the detective. Their earlier fear was being replaced by something stronger, hope. The Red Scorpions' intimidation had worked because everyone felt isolated, afraid to stand up alone. Now, seeing others come forward, that isolation was breaking down. Jenny had started making coffee for everyone, her hands no longer shaking as she worked the espresso machine. The young barista moved with renewed confidence, proudly recounting details of Sarah's takedown to amazed listeners. "You should have seen her," Jenny told a captivated audience. "She was so calm, like she was teaching a class or something. Even when they pulled weapons, she just kept pointing out their mistakes." Officer Rodriguez, who had been coordinating with other units, approached Sarah's table. "We're getting reports from Millbrook and Harrison County," she said quietly. "Seems like Tommy's already talking. He's naming names, locations, giving details about their entire operation." "The kid's scared straight," Sarah nodded. "Fear can be a powerful motivator for change when properly channeled. Tommy's young enough to turn his life around." "And Marcus?" Rodriguez asked. "His military background will complicate things," Sarah replied. "He'll face additional charges for using his training for criminal activities. But sometimes public failure can be its own wake-up call." The media presence outside had grown. Local news vans were setting up for live broadcasts, and reporters were trying to get statements from witnesses. Sarah could see people holding up phones, streaming live video to social media platforms. The story was spreading far beyond Cedar Grove. Eleanor, who had been talking with Detective Chen, returned to Sarah's table. The cafe owner's entire demeanor had changed. She stood straighter, her voice stronger as she spoke. "Detective Chen says they'll need the security footage," she said. "I had those new cameras installed last month, just like you suggested in your security consultation, the ones with facial recognition capabilities." She paused, realization dawning. "You knew, didn't you? You knew this confrontation was coming." Sarah took another sip of her coffee. "I suspected. The Red Scorpions had been escalating their demands. It was only a matter of time before they became overconfident and made a mistake. I just made sure we were ready when they did." Mike Patterson joined their conversation. "My sister runs a cafe in Millbrook. They've been paying protection money too. Do you think, could you help us set up a business owners association? Something to prevent this from happening again?" More business owners gathered around, eager to be part of the discussion. Sarah saw something powerful happening. People who had been isolated by fear were coming together, forming connections, building strength through unity. Detective Chen was still taking statements, but he worked his way over to Sarah. "This is going to have ripple effects across 3 counties," he said. "We're already getting calls from other businesses wanting to report similar extortion schemes, different gangs, same tactics. People just needed to see that it was possible to stand up to them," Sarah replied. "Fear loses its power when you face it together." As the morning turned to afternoon, the Copper Kettle Café had become the epicenter of a rapidly unfolding story. Local news reporter Lisa Chen, no relation to Detective Chen, stood outside, delivering a live report to the growing audience of her morning show. "I'm standing outside the Copper Kettle Café where earlier today, an extraordinary confrontation took place between members of the notorious Red Scorpions Motorcycle Club and what witnesses describe as a single female patron. Sources say the woman, identified only as a former CIA operative, single-handedly neutralized 5 armed gang members who were attempting to extort money from local businesses." Inside, Sarah watched the coverage with a mixture of resignation and amusement. Her phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from former colleagues. The latest was from her old CIA supervisor. "Saw the news. Subtle as ever, Mitchell. Call me when you can." Detective Chen was coordinating with officers from neighboring jurisdictions. The investigation had expanded rapidly as more victims came forward. Tommy's confession had opened a floodgate of information about the Red Scorpions' operations. 7 more businesses in Millbrook have filed reports, Chen told Sarah, and Harrison County is setting up a task force to handle the volume of complaints they're receiving. People who were too scared to speak up before are finding their courage. Sarah nodded, watching as Eleanor directed a cleanup crew that had volunteered to help restore order to the cafe. The community's response had been immediate and overwhelming. Local contractors had offered to repair the damage free of charge, seeing it as their contribution to standing up against the gang's intimidation. Jenny was being interviewed by another reporter, her earlier fear completely transformed into excitement. "Ms. Mitchell didn't just stop them," she was saying. "She showed us that we don't have to be afraid. The way she handled the situation, it was like watching someone defuse a bomb, so careful and precise. Outside, the crowd had grown larger. Word had spread through social media, and people were arriving from neighboring towns. Many were business owners sharing similar stories of intimidation and extortion. Sarah could see them forming groups, exchanging contact information, organizing. Officer Rodriguez returned from processing the suspects. "You've started something big," she told Sarah. "The Red Scorpions leader at the clubhouse is already calling his lawyer. They're trying to distance themselves from Marcus and his crew, claiming they were acting independently." "Classic organizational response," Sarah replied. "When exposed, the hierarchy always attempts to isolate the problem. But Tommy's testimony will make that difficult." A new figure pushed through the crowd outside. Mayor Robert Wilson had arrived, accompanied by his aide and several council members. The mayor was a political survivor who had always maintained a careful distance from the town's gang problems. Now, sensing the shifting winds, he was ready to take a stand. "Ms. Mitchell," he called out as he entered the cafe. "On behalf of Cedar Grove, I want to express our gratitude for your brave actions today." His voice carried the practiced sincerity of a career politician. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Thank you, Mayor Wilson. I trust this means the City Council will be taking a more active role in addressing organized crime in our community." The mayor's aide winced slightly at her directness, but Wilson recovered quickly. "Absolutely. In fact, I'm announcing the formation of a special committee to investigate criminal activities targeting local businesses. We'd be honored if you'd consider serving as a consultant." Before Sarah could respond, Eleanor stepped forward. "With all due respect, Mayor Wilson, we business owners need more than committees. We need action. The Red Scorpions may be dealt with, but there are other groups out there. We need real changes in law enforcement funding, better security infrastructure, and support for small businesses." Other business owners voiced their agreement. The mayor found himself surrounded by constituents who were no longer afraid to speak up. Sarah watched with satisfaction as the conversation shifted from gratitude for her actions to concrete demands for systemic change. Detective Chen pulled Sarah aside. "The FBI just called. They're sending agents from their organized crime task force. Apparently, the Red Scorpions have connections to larger criminal enterprises in 3 states. "Not surprising," Sarah said. "Organizations like this don't exist in isolation. They're usually part of larger networks." She paused, considering. "The FBI's involvement will help, but the real change has to come from the community itself." The cafe's door chimed as a new group entered. Representatives from the Chamber of Commerce, led by their president, Diana Foster. They moved purposefully toward Sarah, carrying folders and tablets. "Ms. Mitchell," Diana began, "we've been compiling data on criminal activities affecting local businesses for months, but no one was willing to go on record. Now," she gestured to the crowd of business owners engaged in intense discussion with the mayor, "would you be willing to help us develop a comprehensive security training program for our members?" Sarah considered Diana's request carefully. The Chamber of Commerce president was already laying out statistics. 27 businesses had reported extortion attempts in the past year, but those were just the ones willing to come forward. The actual number was estimated to be much higher. "First," Sarah replied, "we need to establish a secure reporting system. Many business owners are still afraid of retaliation, even with the Red Scorpions in custody." She turned to Detective Chen. "The police department needs to set up an anonymous tip line, preferably with direct links to both local law enforcement and the FBI task force." Chen nodded, already making notes on his tablet. "We can have that running within 24 hours, but what about immediate protection for those coming forward now?" "I can help with that," came a new voice. Jack Morrison, owner of Cedar Grove Security Services and a former Marine, had arrived. "My company can provide temporary security details for any business owner who testifies, pro bono." The mayor, overhearing this, quickly jumped in. "The city will coordinate with Mr. Morrison's company to ensure protection for all witnesses. We'll expedite any necessary permits and licenses." Sarah watched the interaction with interest. Just hours ago, these same people had been too afraid to even discuss the gang problem openly. Now they were organizing, pooling resources, finding solutions. The catalyst hadn't been her takedown of the bikers. It had been seeing that standing together was possible. Jenny approached with fresh coffee for everyone, her movements more confident than ever. "Ms. Mitchell, some of the other service industry workers are talking about forming a union. For protection, you know. Would you be willing to speak at our first meeting?" Before Sarah could respond, Eleanor joined them. "A union is a great idea, Jenny. In fact, we should coordinate with other businesses. Strengthen numbers, right?" The cafe owner's eyes were bright with purpose. "We could create a network, share information about suspicious activities, warn each other about potential threats." Detective Chen, who had been on his phone, addressed the group. "Just got word from processing. Tommy's given us names of Red Scorpion's associates in 5 other counties. The FBI's expanding their investigation. This is going to have ripple effects across the entire state." Sarah noticed Tommy's mother had arrived at the cafe. The woman looked devastated, but there was also relief in her eyes as she spoke with Officer Rodriguez about her son's cooperation with authorities. Sarah made a mental note to speak with her later. Families of informants often needed support and protection too. The media presence outside had grown. National news networks were picking up the story, focusing on the broader implications of a community standing up to organized crime. Sarah could see the headlines forming. "Small town takes stand against criminal enterprise," and ex-CIA agent sparks community revolution. Diana Foster was still talking, outlining plans for a comprehensive business security network. "We need training sessions, emergency response protocols, a communication system." She paused, looking at Sarah hopefully. "Would you consider taking a more permanent role as our security advisor?" "I have a better idea," Sarah replied. "Let's create a community safety council. Not just business owners, but residents, law enforcement, city officials, everyone working together. My company can provide the initial framework and training, but this needs to be a community-led initiative." The mayor immediately seized on the idea. "Yes, excellent. We can allocate city resources, create a dedicated office." He was already thinking about the positive press coverage, but Sarah held up a hand. "With all due respect, Mayor Wilson, this can't be a political showcase. It needs to be a genuine grassroots effort with real community involvement and oversight." Eleanor backed her up. "She's right. We need this to be about the community, not political points. In fact," she looked around at the gathered business owners, "we should elect our own council representatives, people who've actually dealt with these problems firsthand." The discussion was interrupted by a commotion outside. A group of bikers had arrived, but these weren't Red Scorpions. Their jackets identified them as members of the Road Kings, another local motorcycle club. The police immediately tensed, but the group's leader held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "We're not here for trouble," he announced. "We heard what happened. Our club. We want to make it clear we're not like the Red Scorpions. We're legitimate. We do charity rides, community events. We don't want our community turning against all bikers because of what they did." Sarah studied the group carefully. Their body language was open, non-threatening. Their bikes were positioned for a quick departure if needed. Smart, but not aggressive. She made another mental note. Community rehabilitation would need to include distinguishing between criminal enterprises and legitimate motorcycle clubs. Jack Morrison stepped forward to speak with the Road Kings leader. As a fellow veteran, he could bridge the gap between the bikers and the nervous business owners. Sarah watched as they exchanged contact information, already discussing ways the Road Kings could help with community security efforts. By late afternoon, the Copper Kettle Café had transformed into an impromptu command center for community organization. Tables were pushed together, covered with laptops, papers, and empty coffee cups, as different groups worked on their respective initiatives. The chaos of the morning's confrontation had evolved into purposeful activity. Sarah watched from her corner as Jenny coordinated with other service workers, organizing their first union meeting. The young barista had discovered a talent for leadership that even she hadn't known she possessed. "We need to protect everyone," Jenny was saying, "from the dishwashers to the delivery drivers. No one should feel vulnerable at work." Detective Chen approached Sarah with an update that changed everything. "We just got Tommy's full statement," he said quietly. The Red Scorpions weren't working alone. They had connections in the police department, city hall, even the county clerk's office. People who were paid to look the other way. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Corruption usually runs deeper than the visible threats. That's why real change has to be systematic. She glanced at the mayor, who was still holding court with reporters outside. "How high does it go?" "We're about to find out," Chen replied. "The FBI's Public Corruption Unit is joining the investigation. They're particularly interested in certain building permits and zoning changes that benefited Red Scorpion's associates." The cafe's door chimed again as Amanda Chen, Detective Chen's sister, and the city's assistant district attorney entered. She made her way directly to Sarah and her brother, her expression serious. "We're convening a special grand jury," Amanda announced without preamble. "This goes beyond gang activity. We're looking at RICO charges, money laundering, public corruption, but we need to move fast before evidence starts disappearing." Sarah considered this development. "The community needs to know, but carefully. If we reveal too much too soon, corrupt officials might destroy evidence or threaten witnesses." She looked at the gathered business owners. "They've found their courage. We can't let that be undermined by hidden threats." A commotion near the door drew their attention. Tommy's mother had returned, this time accompanied by 3 other women. Sarah recognized them as mothers of other Red Scorpions members, including Marcus's wife. They looked nervous but determined. "We want to help," Tommy's mother announced. "Our boys. They didn't start out bad. The gang preyed on them when they were vulnerable. There must be others like Tommy who want out but are afraid." Eleanor immediately moved to welcome the women, offering them coffee and a quiet table away from the cameras. Sarah noted how naturally the cafe owner had stepped into her new role as a community leader. "We could start a rehabilitation program," Eleanor suggested, "not just for gang members but for at-risk youth. Stop the cycle before it begins." The Road King's leader, who had stayed to help with planning, spoke up. "Our club could help with that. Show kids there's a positive way to be part of a brotherhood. Mentorship, job training, legitimate activities." Diana Foster was already adding this to her growing list of initiatives. The Chamber of Commerce president had proven remarkably adaptable, shifting from pure business concerns to broader community welfare. Jack Morrison joined the discussion, bringing his security expertise. "We need to think about immediate protection too. Once these corruption charges start coming down, there might be desperate people making desperate moves." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her old CIA supervisor. "Meeting tomorrow, 0900, bringing resources. Some friends very interested in your community rehabilitation model." Officer Rodriguez, who had been coordinating with other precincts, shared some surprising news. "We're getting calls from neighboring towns. They want to know how to set up similar community safety councils. This is spreading faster than anyone expected." The mayor, having finished with the media, tried to reassert control over the situation. "Perhaps we should form an official steering committee," he suggested. "With proper city oversight, of course." But the community leaders had found their voice. "No offense, Mayor Wilson," Eleanor said firmly, "but we need this to stay grassroots. The people in this room, we know our community. We know what we need." Sarah watched the interaction with approval. The mayor's attempt to institutionalize the movement was being naturally checked by community leadership that had emerged organically through crisis. Amanda Chen was taking notes on everything, building her case. "This is unprecedented," she told Sarah. "Usually communities stay silent out of fear, but this," she gestured at the room full of engaged citizens, "this is how real change happens." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the copper kettle's windows as Assistant DA Amanda Chen laid out a series of documents on the table before Sarah. The papers detailed a complex web of connections between the Red Scorpions, local officials, and several prominent business developments in the area. "Look at this." Amanda pointed to a particular set of transactions. Shell companies buying prime real estate just before mysterious zoning changes. Properties that had been in families for generations suddenly sold under pressure, all connected to businesses that paid protection money to the Red Scorpions. Sarah studied the patterns, her CIA training helping her see the bigger picture. They weren't just running a protection racket, she concluded. They were helping corrupt officials force out small businesses for development deals. The intimidation was just one part of a larger strategy. Detective Chen added more files to the table. Tommy's testimony opened up everything. The kid kept detailed records, dates, names, amounts. He may have seemed like a low-level member, but he was smart enough to create an insurance policy. The revelation hit Eleanor hard. She had been listening nearby, and suddenly several things made sense. The pressure to sell the cafe, the mysterious building inspector findings, the sudden problems with our permits. It wasn't just about the protection money, was it? No, Sarah confirmed gently. Your cafe sits on a corner lot in what developers consider a prime location. The Red Scorpions were just the visible muscle in a much larger operation. The news spread quickly through the gathered community members, transforming their anger into something more focused. This wasn't just about street thugs anymore. This was about powerful people exploiting their own neighbors. Jenny, who had been organizing union contacts, suddenly remembered something. Last month, 3 other coffee shops in the area closed down. They all said it was due to code violations, but they'd been here for years without problems. The same pattern appears in Millbrook and Harrison County, Amanda confirmed. Small businesses forced out, followed by quick property sales and rapid development projects, all tied to the same group of shell companies. Jack Morrison had been quiet, studying the documents with a veteran's eye for detail. Some of these development companies have connections to private security firms, he noted. Firms that then get exclusive contracts for the new properties. It's a complete racket. The Road King's leader, who had introduced himself as Steve Russell, shook his head in disgust. And they called us a gang. At least we're honest about who and what we are. Sarah's phone buzzed again, another message from her former CIA supervisor. Corruption investigation expanding. State-level officials involved. Keep your community ready. Mayor Wilson, who had been trying to stay involved in all the discussions, suddenly looked very uncomfortable. Several people noticed him checking his phone repeatedly, his face growing paler with each message. Diana Foster was already adapting the Chamber of Commerce's plans. We need to document everything, she declared. Every permit denial, every inspection, every pressure tactic. Create a timeline showing the pattern. Amanda nodded approvingly. That's exactly what we need for the grand jury. But we also need to protect these records. Once word gets out about the investigation, already handled. Sarah interrupted quietly. Everything's being uploaded to secure servers with multiple redundancies. Any attempt to destroy local records now would only serve as additional evidence of obstruction. Tommy's mother and the other women who had come forward had been listening intently. This explains why they targeted our boys, Tommy's mother said softly. They needed people who were desperate enough to do their dirty work, but naive enough not to see the bigger picture. Officer Rodriguez, who had returned from processing more witness statements, had news of her own. We're getting reports of similar patterns in cities across the state. The FBI is expanding their investigation again. This could go national. The mayor suddenly stood up, making a show of checking his watch. Well, this has been quite informative, but I have other appointments. He tried to move toward the door, but found his path blocked by Detective Chen. Actually, Mayor Wilson, Chen said calmly, the FBI agents would like to speak with you. They're particularly interested in your relationship with certain development companies. The mayor's face went from pale to ashen. I need to contact my attorney. That would be wise, Amanda agreed, already pulling out a warrant. But first, we'll need your phone and any other electronic devices you have with you. We wouldn't want any evidence to accidentally disappear. Sarah watched as the mayor was escorted out, noticing how his departure seemed to lift a weight from the room. The community members looked at each other with new understanding. They had been fighting not just street-level thugs, but a deeply entrenched system of corruption. The arrest of Mayor Wilson sent shockwaves through Cedar Grove. As news helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage of the mayor being escorted to an FBI vehicle. The Copper Kettle Café remained the heart of the community's response. Eleanor had declared the cafe would stay open as long as needed, serving as a command center for what was quickly becoming a movement. 3 more council members just resigned, Detective Chen announced, reading from his phone. They're claiming it's for personal reasons, but we all know what that means. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Rats leaving a sinking ship. They're hoping voluntary resignation will look better than being caught in the investigation. Amanda Chen was coordinating with FBI agents, her laptop showing a complex diagram of connections. The Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit just found something interesting, she reported. Remember those shell companies? They're linked to a national network of similar operations in at least 12 states. Jenny, who had been managing the cafe's social media accounts, looked up from her phone. Our story is trending nationally. People are sharing similar experiences from their own towns. It's not just us. This is happening everywhere. The cafe's television, usually tuned to morning shows, was now displaying breaking news coverage. A reporter stood outside City Hall. In a stunning development, federal agents have seized documents from multiple municipal offices following the arrest of Mayor Robert Wilson. Sources say this is part of a larger investigation into organized crime and public corruption. Eleanor turned away from the TV, addressing the gathered community members. We can't let this paralyze our town. With the mayor and council members resigning, we need to ensure essential services continue. Amanda Chen was coordinating with FBI agents, her laptop showing a complex diagram of connections. The Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit just found something interesting, she reported. Remember those shell companies? They're linked to a national network of similar operations in at least 12 states. Jenny, who had been managing the cafe's social media accounts, looked up from her phone. Our story is trending nationally. People are sharing similar experiences from their own towns. It's not just us. This is happening everywhere. The cafe's television, usually tuned to morning shows, was now displaying breaking news coverage. A reporter stood outside City Hall. In a stunning development, federal agents have seized documents from multiple municipal offices following the arrest of Mayor Robert Wilson. Sources say this is part of a larger investigation into organized crime and public corruption. Eleanor turned away from the TV, addressing the gathered community members. We can't let this paralyze our town. With the mayor and council members resigning, we need to ensure essential services continue. Diana Foster was already ahead of her. The Chamber of Commerce can help coordinate between businesses and city departments. We need to maintain stability while this plays out. Jack Morrison added his perspective. My security teams are already noticing something interesting. With the corrupt officials scrambling, other criminal operations are going quiet. They're afraid of getting caught in the investigation. Steve Russell, the Road Kings leader, had been making calls to other legitimate motorcycle clubs. We're spreading the word through our networks, he explained. Any club that wants to maintain a clean reputation is distancing themselves from the Red Scorpions and their associates. Sarah's former CIA supervisor had sent another update. State Bureau of Investigation joining the case. Similar patterns emerging in Capital City. Keep your people ready. Tommy's mother, who had been helping other families of gang members, shared some encouraging news. More young men are coming forward, wanting to leave the gang life. They see Tommy cooperating with authorities and getting support instead of retaliation. Officer Rodriguez returned from a briefing at the station. The police department's internal affairs division is in full gear. 3 senior officers have been suspended pending investigation. But here's the good news. The honest cops are finally feeling free to speak up. A young patrol officer who had been helping coordinate security added, It's like a weight's been lifted. We all knew something was wrong, but the corrupt leaders had so much power. Now we can actually do our jobs. Sarah watched as the community continued to organize itself. What had started as a simple confrontation with local thugs had exposed a system of corruption that had seemed untouchable just hours ago. But more importantly, it had revealed the true strength of a united community. Amanda was reviewing more documents with Detective Chen. The pattern is clear now, she explained to the group. They target small towns, infiltrate local government, use gangs for muscle, and slowly take over through a combination of violence and bureaucratic pressure. But they didn't count on communities fighting back, Eleanor added firmly. They thought we'd stay isolated, too afraid to stand up for each other. Jenny, still monitoring social media, reported more developments. Other towns are reaching out, asking how we organized our response. They want to know how to start their own community safety councils. Diana Foster was already drafting guidelines. We need to document everything we've learned, create a playbook for other communities facing similar situations. Sarah's phone buzzed with another message, this time from an unexpected source. It was Marcus, the Red Scorpions leader she had confronted that morning, sending a message through his attorney. Ready to talk, not just about Cedar Grove, everything. Detective Chen read the message over her shoulder. With Marcus cooperating too, this could bring down their entire network. The cafe's door opened as FBI Special Agent Sandra Martinez entered, carrying folders marked confidential. She headed straight for Sarah and the Chen siblings. What you've uncovered here, Martinez began without preamble, matches patterns we've been tracking for years, but we've never had a community response like this before. Usually people stay quiet, take the pressure, eventually give up. Cedar Grove is different, Eleanor said proudly. We just needed to be reminded that we're stronger together. Sarah noticed Jack Morrison having an intense conversation with Steve Russell in the corner. The security expert and the motorcycle club leader were comparing notes on suspicious development projects in neighboring counties. We've identified at least 15 other properties under pressure, Morrison reported to the group. Same tactics, manipulated inspections, permit denials, escalating harassment. Add those to the case files, Amanda instructed. Every piece helps establish the pattern. Night had fallen over Cedar Grove, but the Copper Kettle Café showed no signs of slowing down. The warm glow from its windows stood as a beacon of hope as community members worked tirelessly to build something new from the ashes of corruption. Special Agent Martinez emerged from a lengthy phone conference with Washington, her expression both tired and determined. The Attorney General just authorized the formation of a specialized unit, she announced. They're calling it the Community Corruption Response Team. Cedar Grove will be the pilot program. Sarah, who had been analyzing patterns in the seized documents, looked up with interest. They're learning. Traditional law enforcement approaches often miss the community element. You need both top-down and bottom-up responses. Eleanor was organizing the next day's community meeting when her phone rang. It was the state banking commissioner. They're freezing suspicious development accounts, she reported after the call. Any property deals connected to the corrupt officials are being put on hold pending investigation. Amanda Chen had just finished another round of depositions. We're seeing a domino effect, she explained. Each person who comes forward leads us to 3 more. The corruption network is unraveling faster than we can document it. Detective Chen added, Marcus's testimony opened up everything. He kept detailed records of every meeting, every payoff, every threat. He thought it was insurance. Turns out he was right, just not in the way he planned. Jenny, still managing the digital response, shared some surprising news. We're getting international attention now. Communities in other countries are reaching out, asking about our organization methods. They're facing similar issues with corruption and organized crime. Jack Morrison and Steve Russell had expanded their security network. We're creating a training program, Morrison explained, teaching business owners how to recognize and document suspicious patterns without putting themselves at risk. And my club's organizing regular patrols, Russell added, legitimate motorcycle clubs working with local businesses, showing that we can be part of the solution. Sarah's former CIA supervisor had sent a crucial update. Foreign financial connections confirmed. Treasury Department joining investigation. Your community model is attracting serious attention at federal level. Tommy's mother had become the unofficial leader of a support group for families affected by gang activity. We're not just helping them leave the gangs, she explained. We're helping them rebuild their lives, find legitimate work, restore their connections to the community. Officer Rodriguez brought news from the police department's reorganization efforts. We're implementing new transparency measures, she reported. community oversight boards, regular public audits, direct communication channels with neighborhood representatives. Diana Foster and the Chamber of Commerce had developed a comprehensive plan for business protection. "We're creating an early warning system," she explained. "Any business owner who experiences suspicious pressure or harassment can activate a community response network." Agent Martinez gathered everyone's attention. "The FBI's analysis of your community response is highlighting something crucial," she said. "Traditional organized crime relies on isolating victims, making them feel powerless. Your model of immediate community support completely disrupts their methodology." Eleanor had set up a whiteboard where she was mapping out long-term community initiatives. "We need to think beyond just responding to corruption," she insisted. "We need to build systems that prevent it from taking root in the first place." Jenny had organized a youth outreach program, targeting the same vulnerable population the gangs often recruited from. "We're showing them there's another way," she explained. "Community service, job training, mentorship, giving them the support they need before the gangs can get to them." Sarah watched as these initiatives took shape, noting how each person naturally found their role in the larger effort. The cafe had become more than just a meeting place. It was an incubator for social change. Amanda was reviewing proposals for governmental reform. "We're not just replacing corrupt officials," she emphasized. "We're rebuilding the entire system with transparency and community oversight built into its foundation." The cafe's door opened as more community members arrived, bringing food for the workers and new ideas for reform. Sarah noticed how people who had been strangers that morning were now working together like old friends, united by a common purpose. Near midnight, the Copper Kettle Café remained illuminated, a symbol of community resilience that had captured national attention. News vans were still parked outside, broadcasting live updates about what media outlets had dubbed the Cedar Grove model. Agent Martinez returned from another conference call, this time with more significant news. "The president has been briefed on our situation," she announced quietly. "They're considering an executive order to establish similar community response programs nationwide." Sarah wasn't surprised. Communities have always been the best defense against organized crime. We just needed to prove it could work on a larger scale. Eleanor, despite the late hour, was hosting a video conference with business owners from across the country. "It's not just about fighting back," she explained to the virtual crowd. "It's about building something better, creating systems that serve the community instead of exploiting it." Amanda Chen interrupted with breaking news. "The state governor just announced a special session of the legislature. They're drafting new anti-corruption laws based on what we've uncovered here." Detective Chen added more context. "It's not just our state. 5 other states have contacted our department in the last hour. They want details about our community response protocols." Jenny's social media command center had evolved into a nationwide coordination hub. "We're getting reports from cities across the country," she reported. "Communities are organizing their own safety councils, using our model as a template." Jack Morrison shared updates from his expanding security network. "We've identified a pattern," he explained, pointing to a digital map. "The same development companies, using the same tactics in dozens of cities, but now communities are ready for them." Steve Russell's Road Kings had become unexpected ambassadors for community reform. "Other motorcycle clubs are reaching out," he said. "They want to know how they can help their communities, prove they're not all criminals." Sarah's phone lit up with a message from Langley. "CIA analysis confirms international implications. Similar community resistance models showing success in combating corruption worldwide. Your template being studied for international development programs." Tommy's mother had just finished a national television interview. "They want me to speak at a congressional hearing," she said, still seeming surprised by the turn of events. "Share our experience about how communities can help break the cycle of gang recruitment." Officer Rodriguez brought news of police reform spreading beyond Cedar Grove. "Police departments across the state are implementing our transparency measures," she reported. "The old guard is retiring. New leadership is embracing community oversight." Diana Foster was coordinating with national business organizations. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce wants to create a task force, she announced. They're calling it the Community Integrity Initiative. Agent Martinez shared another development. The FBI is creating a new division specifically focused on community-based anti-corruption efforts. They want to base it here in Cedar Grove. Eleanor looked around her cafe, now transformed into something she never imagined. When I opened this place, I wanted it to be a community hub, she reflected. I never dreamed it would become this. Jenny had set up live streams connecting similar community centers across the country. We're creating a national network, she explained. Real-time sharing of information, resources, and support. Sarah observed the evolution with professional interest. The corrupt officials and criminal organizations expected resistance, she noted. What they didn't expect was transformation. They can't fight against communities that are fundamentally changing how they operate. Amanda was reviewing proposals from other districts' attorneys. Everyone wants to know how we built our case, she said. But they're missing the point. The legal case was just one part of a larger community response. The cafe's television showed continuous coverage of similar movements spreading across the country. Communities large and small were standing up, refusing to be victimized by corruption and organized crime. As Thursday morning dawned, the Copper Kettle Café had been operating continuously for over 24 hours. What began as a confrontation with local bikers had catalyzed a national movement for community empowerment and anti-corruption reform. Sarah was reviewing the latest intelligence briefings when Agent Martinez approached with groundbreaking news. The Justice Department is announcing a national initiative this morning, she said. They're calling it the Community Empowerment and Crime Prevention Act. Cedar Grove will be the model program. Eleanor served fresh coffee to the tireless workers, her cafe now a symbol of resistance and renewal. CBS Morning News wants to do their entire show from here tomorrow, she said, still amazed by the attention. They're calling us the little cafe that changed America. Amanda Chen returned from the federal courthouse with significant developments. The grand jury indictments are coming down. 87 officials across 6 states, including 2 federal judges and 4 state senators. This is just the beginning. Detective Chen added context to the expanding investigation. Every hour brings new revelations. The corruption network was more extensive than anyone imagined, but it's collapsing like a house of cards. Jenny had transformed her social media operation into a national coordination center. We're tracking similar community movements in over 300 cities now, she reported, each one adapting our model to their local needs. Jack Morrison shared intelligence from his security network. Criminal organizations are going into panic mode, he explained. They don't know how to handle communities that stand together. Their usual tactics of intimidation are backfiring. Steve Russell's Road Kings had become symbols of community reform. Other clubs across the country are following our lead, he said proudly. We're organizing a national convention focused on community service and anti-corruption efforts. Sarah received an urgent message from the State Department. Community resistance model being studied for international anti-corruption programs. UN officials requesting briefing. Cedar Grove approach could revolutionize global anti-corruption efforts. Tommy's mother had become a powerful voice for family support and rehabilitation. We're creating a national network, she announced, helping families break free from gang influence, supporting youth at risk, building better futures. Officer Rodriguez brought news of systemic change in law enforcement. Police academies are revising their training programs, she reported, adding modules on community engagement and corruption resistance based on our experience. Diana Foster was coordinating with international business organizations. The World Economic Forum wants to study our model, she revealed. They see it as a potential solution to corruption in developing economies. Agent Martinez shared another breakthrough. The FBI's new community-based division will be headquartered here, she confirmed. Cedar Grove will train agents from across the country in community-centered law enforcement. Eleanor looked around her transformed cafe with pride. We've created something that can't be stopped, she said. Not just a response to corruption, but a new way of building community strength. Jenny's digital network had grown exponentially. Communities are sharing resources, strategies, and support in real time, she explained. The isolation that made corruption possible is disappearing. Sarah observed the ongoing transformation with satisfaction. What we're seeing is more than reform, she noted. It's a fundamental shift in how communities protect themselves and build resilience. Amanda was reviewing requests from prosecutors nationwide. They all want to know our legal strategy, she said. But the real story is how the community came together to make the legal case possible. The cafe's screens showed similar scenes playing out across the country, communities gathering, organizing, standing together against corruption and intimidation. A group of international observers had arrived to study the Cedar Grove model. What you've created here, their leader said, could change how we approach corruption worldwide. Eleanor had started documenting everything for future reference. Other communities shouldn't have to start from scratch, she explained. We're creating a blueprint for change. 1 week after the confrontation that changed everything, Sarah Mitchell sat at her usual table in the Copper Kettle Café, sipping her morning coffee. The cafe had finally returned to its normal operating hours, though nothing else about Cedar Grove could be called normal anymore. Hard to believe it's only been a week, Eleanor said, joining Sarah with her own cup of coffee. The cafe owner gestured to the wall where newspaper headlines had been framed. Cedar Grove revolution spreads nationwide. Community model transforms anti-corruption efforts. Small town changes how America fights crime. Agent Martinez arrived with the latest statistics. 2,000 arrests across the country, she reported. 15 major criminal organizations disrupted. Over $3 billion in corrupt assets frozen. And it all started because you decided to stand up to 5 bikers. Sarah smiled slightly. I just wanted to enjoy my coffee in peace. The community did the real work. Jenny was training other young people in social media coordination. Her impromptu command center had evolved into a permanent community response network. We're connected with groups in 38 countries now, she said proudly. They're all adapting the Cedar Grove model. Detective Chen shared updates from the expanding investigation. Marcus and Tommy's testimony opened floodgates. We're uncovering corruption networks that operated for decades. But more importantly, we're seeing how to prevent them from forming again. Amanda Chen had just returned from Washington. Congress is fast-tracking the Community Empowerment Act, she announced. They're calling it the most significant anti-corruption legislation in U.S. history. Jack Morrison's security company had transformed into a national training organization. We're teaching communities how to protect themselves, he explained. Not just from street-level threats, but from systematic corruption. Steve Russell and the Road Kings had become community leaders in their own right. We're showing that brotherhood doesn't have to mean criminality, he said. Real strength comes from building up your community, not tearing it down. Tommy's mother was preparing for a national speaking tour. Families across the country need to know there's hope, she explained. That communities can come together to break the cycle of violence and corruption. Officer Rodriguez reported on the police department's transformation. We've completely rebuilt our relationship with the community, she said. Trust works better than fear. We just had to prove it. Diana Foster shared news from the business community. The Cedar Grove model is being taught in business schools now, she revealed. They're calling it community-centered corporate responsibility. The cafe's door chimed as more visitors arrived, community leaders from across the country, coming to learn from Cedar Grove's experience. Eleanor had set up a regular program to share their story and help others implement similar changes. Sarah received a final message from her CIA supervisor. Cedar Grove model being implemented in democratic development programs worldwide. You didn't just change one town, you might have changed how the world fights corruption. Jenny showed Sarah the latest social media statistics. Our hashtag has reached over 100 million people, she said. But the numbers don't tell the real story. It's about the communities coming together, finding their strength. Eleanor had added a new sign above the cafe door. Where community finds its strength. Below it, a smaller plaque read, Sometimes the biggest changes start with one person standing up. As the morning crowd filled the cafe, Sarah watched the familiar faces, people who had been strangers just a week ago, now united in purpose. The Red Scorpions were gone. The corrupt officials were facing justice, but the real victory was in what had been built in their place. "You know what the best part is?" Eleanor asked, refilling Sarah's cup. "It's not just about fighting corruption anymore. We've remembered how to be a community again. That's something no amount of intimidation can take away." Sarah nodded, enjoying the peaceful morning atmosphere. "The best victories," she said quietly, "are the ones that build something new from the ruins of the old." Through the cafe windows, she could see Cedar Grove coming to life, not as a town afraid of criminals and corrupt officials, but as a community that had found its voice and its strength. Other communities would face similar challenges, but now they had a blueprint for success. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Copper Kettle Café, just as it had a week ago. But now it illuminated something different, not just a local coffee shop, but a symbol of how ordinary people, standing together, could change the world. "More coffee?" Jenny asked, holding the pot. Sarah smiled. "Always. After all, you never know when another quiet morning might turn into a revolution."